I think not contributing enough to get the full match is literally leaving free money on the table.
There are two key factors that I look at. One is the expense ratio, and the other is the return.
I personally have had a lot of people who told me they don't contribute to their 401ks because they are unsure, and I have convinced every single one of them to at least get the employer match.
If you are on a work visa and you don't know if you will retire in the US, should you even care about retirement accounts? Short answer, yes. Long answer, that's today's episode. Welcome to Green Mango, personal finance for immigrants by immigrants. I am Kunal. With me, I have Shreya, my co host. And today we are diving into 401ks. But before we do that, Shreya, what even is a retirement account?
Retirement accounts are basically a universal idea. Like almost every country has some version of it because it's in the government's interest that you save for your own retirement instead of relying on government support during your retirement. So, for example, for people who have worked in India, they might be familiar with PPF or the Public Provident Fund. I personally haven't worked, so I'm speaking a little more broadly here, but the general idea is that you will contribute a percentage of your salary, and then the employer will contribute a match of that salary, and that money is then invested or put into a saving account with some interest rate, and generally it will stay there until you retire. That retirement age will vary across countries. Now, in the United States, there are two main retirement accounts, the 401k, which we are going to cover today, and the IRA or the individual retirement account, which we will save for a future episode. Fun fact, I learned at 2 a.m. last night when we decided that we are going to record this episode that 401k was literally named after Section 401k of the US tax code. So, not a catchy name, but that's where it comes from for all the trivia buffs.
Yeah, those 2 a.m. journey down the rabbit hole are always fun in the moment, and you come out with facts that nobody cares about, but it's always exciting in the moment.
Which brings me to another cool fact about how the 401k came to be. So, before the 1980s, pension was actually the primary retirement vehicle, but that meant that the company had the financial responsibility of sustaining workers through their retirement years. Then, as people started to live longer and capitalism thrived, 401ks gained popularity among corporations because they could basically shrug off their responsibility and be like, nope, you're gonna care for your own retirement next egg. So now, what? Some 50 years later, this is what we have, and we have to really care about it, even though we are immigrants, because of the tax advantages and also free money. So, a lot of employers incentivize you to contribute to your 401k by giving something called an employer match.
Yeah, so for people who understand with examples like me, I'll try to break it down. Let's say your base salary for easy math is 100,000 annually, and you have one of those good employers who offers 50% match up to 6%. What that means is when you contribute 6% of your base pay, which is $6,000, your employer is going to match or offer free money in your 401k account, 50% of that, which is 3,000. So even though your out of pocket deduction was 6,000, your end balance in your 401k account ended up as 9,000.
Yeah, I think not contributing enough to get the full match is literally leaving free money on the table.
Yeah, for sure. Those 3,000, like if you didn't contribute the entire 6%, or if you contributed less, you would not have maximized the employer match and lost free money. So I
Yeah.
have come across different types of 401k accounts. What are those and what do they even mean?
So, primarily, there are two types. One is the traditional 401k, and the second is the Roth 401k. Do note that not all employers offer Roth 401k. And traditional is almost offered by every employer, especially if you are salaried. But we'll go into the details of what those two mean. So, starting off with traditional, it's fairly simple pre tax money. So, that just means that if you have a salary of $100,000 and you contribute $10,000 to your 401k, and this does not include the employer match, this is just your own contributions, then at the end of the year, when they calculate how much you're going to be taxed on, it is going to be only $90,000, not the full $100,000. So the idea is that you just defer the taxes on this money till you are taking that money out.
Yeah, and I guess if you are one of those who thinks that your tax liability may be higher when you are planning to retire in your 60s.
Who is willing to work till then? I would be ready to retire tomorrow.
Yeah, regardless, even if you retire early, government still treats 60 plus as your retirement age. So when you retire, if you think your income tax bracket might be higher than what it is today, there is another type of 401k account, which is the Roth, where you are taxed before contribution and your money grows tax free. When you withdraw from your Roth 401k, your growth and the contributions are not taxed during withdrawal. So just to summarize the differences, traditional, you are not taxed during contribution, you are taxed during withdrawal on your contributions plus on the gain. And Roth 401k, you are taxed before contribution, but your contributions and the growth is not taxed during withdrawal.
I actually have a lot of math to prove that traditional may be the best route for 90% of people, even if they think they are going to retire at a higher tax bracket later on. Primarily, this applies, I would say, for FIRE aspirants, and FIRE, for those who don't know, stands for financial independence, retire early. Kunal and I both are huge advocates of FIRE. This is why we started the podcast, probably.
Yeah, if I could retire, like, I would have retired 5 years back, but we are doing
I
what we can to retire as soon as possible without lowering our quality of life or the standard of living.
That's literally the only reason I'm in tech. I'm suffering the emotional torture just so I can retire early. Anyway, moving back to reality, now that I have contributed to my 401k, I cannot just let the money sit there. So, what are some options we have to invest that money?
The employer typically for 401k selects a certain group of funds that we have option to. But before we go into the exact funds, let's talk about what we should look at or how do we read which funds to invest in. There are two key factors that I look at. One is the expense ratio and the other is the returns. Expense ratio is cost of contributing or investing in that fund. So for example, if your expense ratio is 0.10, for every $10,000 you invest in that fund, you will be charged 0.1%.
That's $10. Yeah, which doesn't seem like much, I think, at this point, but it really adds up. And given if you consider 401k one of your main retirement accounts, you will probably end up with $500,000 or $600,000 in there. So then the annual fees really eat into your returns. And do keep in mind here that most math still assume that S&P is returning an average of 7%. So that 0.1%, as it progressively grows, if you're looking at something like 1%, you're literally diminishing your returns by 1%.
Yeah, and that's a key factor. This is not a one-time cost, it's an annual recurring cost. So as your account grows and as you keep contributing more, and hopefully you have started early in the journey, so you have 30 to 50 years to keep that amount growing in your 401k account. And every year, if you're paying that 0.1% or in some cases 1%, that adds up very quickly. So there are funds which are much lower than the examples that we've provided so far, like 0.02 or 0.05. Those are the ones that I typically invest in. And then the second factor I look at is the annual return. So like Shreya mentioned, S&P is 7 to 8%. As long as you can match or beat that with a low expense ratio, that's a good fund to invest in. Do you have some examples, Shreya?
Yeah, personally, I try to diversify a little bit because right now the S&P is very tech heavy and just the top 7 companies take up a lot of weightage in the S&Ps because my employer allows those funds. I do a mix of S&P, which also acts as a large growth kind of ETF, or electronically traded funds, and I also invest some percentage in the mid cap and small cap. I don't invest in bonds currently because I am 30 and I am guessing that I have a few more years of work left in me, so I don't need to be super cautious with my money. And I'm chasing growth right now, so my portfolio is more equity heavy. There is another fund that I would like to discuss beyond these that we shared, and that's called the Target Date Fund, which almost every 401k has the option for. I think the way it works is it will be titled something like Target Date 2055. And these are the funds that you will be automatically enrolled in unless you choose to build your portfolio yourself. So, what does 2055 here mean? It means that based on your age, your employer sort of assumes that you will be retiring in 2055 and they allocate a equities and bonds on the basis of that. So if you are, say, in a target date fund 2030, you are probably going to have a higher allocation of bonds because they're assuming that you're going to retire very soon and you cannot handle the ups and downs of the stock market. You want more stability. Personally, for people who are not close to retirement age, I do not recommend investing in target date funds if you have options for S&P mid cap, small cap available, just because you don't really need bond and you don't need the higher expense ratio for these target date funds.
Yeah, I definitely like the idea of diversification. For example, like I think this year I've noticed that mid cap and small cap is doing much better than large cap.
Yes, and tech when it grows like crazy, but when it drops, it also drops like crazy. So if your employer allows it, my employer doesn't, it's also good to have diversification across sectors. So not just owning tech, but maybe owning some ETFs across healthcare or banking or consumer stationaries, the other sectors basically.
Yeah, I think this is where contributions to IRA can be really lucrative because you get a lot more options. And this is probably something for a future episode when we talk more about IRA. Okay. Is there anything that is like in the fine print that the listeners should be aware of, you think? Or is everything like black or white exactly visible in the front?
Nothing is black and white in this world, but one example or one gotcha I would say is vesting schedule. I've seen an example on threads of a finance bro going bollocks saying his employer did not give him the employer contributions when he left. And turns out the fine print was that the vesting schedule for 401k for the full employer match was 2 years and he left at 1 year and 8 months or something. So that's something to keep in mind. If your employer is contributing heavy to your 401k for the employer match to retain full employer match, you might want to stay back for a couple of months. Otherwise, you will be losing all that money.
And that's a good tip. A lot of us don't pay attention to that fine print because we accept terms either in the offer or on the plan and don't go into the minor details.
Nobody is awake through the HR seminar as they walk you through all the benefits, but it's definitely worth looking into. The other tip that is worth noting is also the Mega Backdoor Roth. It doesn't give you an immediate tax advantage, but as we explained how Roth functions, it can be useful for preserving your gains and not paying taxes on that later on. We will cover this in a future episode because I think one of the advantages of Mega Backdoor Roth comes from being able to convert it immediately into your Roth IRA.
Okay, so we understood all the concepts and some of the fine print that we should check. So, what's the framework? Once I understand these terms and I start earning, how should I contribute in order to maximize my retirement account?
First step is no matter how much you are earning, it's worth contributing enough to get the full employer match. Second, depending on your circumstance, if you want more flexibility, then you may not contribute up to the full limit of the 401k. But if you are in a higher tax bracket and you can do with some relief, then I would advise that you can contribute up to 24,500, just your contributions, not including the employer match, into the traditional 401k. And third, as I briefly mentioned, you can look into the Mega Backdoor Roth if it applies for your situation. And at that point, it's really a trade off of whether you want flexibility or you want to basically have tax free returns.
Okay, so I guess once we have maximized our account, the big question that we started the episode with, what if I don't retire in the US? What options do I have? Should I even care about? So hopefully, through this episode, we've at least explained why it is important. And now let's talk about what are the options if you do end up leaving the US by choice or by force. What do you do?
I think there are multiple different options depending on one's situation. One is to withdraw and basically get the 10% penalty that you have and also pay taxes on it. And in that case, you are just like, okay, I am breaking up with the US completely. But if you don't mind keeping your money there, then some of the ideas that fire aspirants use can actually be used for immigrants to lower the tax burden and pay as less penalty as possible. One thing I would highlight and why I personally don't love Roth is that Roth is not recognized outside the US. So if you are taking money out of your Roth when you are in India, for example, you are not going to get the gains as tax free. You will have to pay taxes on that. Again, these are a little complicated, and I'm hoping that through our podcast, we can simplify some of these concepts for people. I personally have had a lot of people who told me they don't contribute to their 401ks because they are unsure, and I have convinced every single one of them to at least get the employer match because, I mean, an extra $5,000 doesn't hurt if that's the minimum also that you're getting.
If anyone wants us to elaborate on this, just let us know in the comments and we'll try to bring on a guest or a few who have actually moved out of the US to either their home country or a different country and listen live from them how they manage their retirement accounts.
And you can also slide into our DMs on Instagram. We are Green Mango Finance on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcast. So leave us a comment wherever you're listening to us or seeing us. And if you have any topics that you are dying to know more about, let us know and we'll try to cover it in future episodes.